proceed, Mr. President?
Yeah, and it shows me now we're streaming on Zoom. Okay, go ahead. Reports from standing committees.
February 2nd, 2021. Mr. President, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 66 engrossed 2021 large project funding, respectfully reports back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Voting aye, Senators Garreau, Hicks, Kinski, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Signed, Drew Perkins, Chairman. Mr. President, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 15, Department of Transportation Communications Facilities, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Voting aye, Senators Garreau, Hicks, Kinski, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Signed, Drew Perkins, Chairman.
Thank you. A couple of notes before we go back into general file, folks. We'll have these bills that are in Senate committees sent out again tonight, so you can check and double check what's in each committee. A couple of other things. Give us a little time to process everything here. We kind of stepped on the floor leader as he's getting ready to do referrals. He had it ready. And just for those out across the state, I've called upon the good experience of Senator Case to help us with everything here. He's probably more versed in any of this than any of us would ever be. And so we had a little conversation, just keep us on the rail, and he's agreed to do that. So we appreciate that here in the chambers. So with that, let's go ahead. Consideration of bills on general file. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business for consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senator Garreau, you can resume presiding over the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I had a list of bills to take up, I'd love to do it. So,
Mr. Chairman, this is Majority Floor Leader. We will take up Senate File 66, followed by, or House Bill 66, followed by House Bill 15, and we'll get you a further list in a minute or two here. That'll give you 2.
thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. The Committee of the Whole will please come back to order. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 66. Will the Chief Clerk please read the House bill?
House Bill 66, 2021 Large Project Funding, an act relating to the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Funding Act, sponsored by Natural Resource Funding. It was referred to your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, who returned a recommendation that it do pass. Voting aye, Senators Ellis, Garreau, Landon, Salazar, and Schuler. Signed, Affey Ellis, Chairman. It was again re-referred to your committee number 2, Appropriations, who returned a do pass recommendation. Voting ayes, Senator Garreau, Hicks, Kinski, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Signed, Drew Perkins, Chairman.
Thank you, Chief Clerk. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 66, the 2021 Large Project Funding Bill. And to explain this bill, I apologize to my committee chair or my co-committee members. No, Mr. Chairman, our Committee of the Whole Chairman was going to help us present this. So I just wanted to see if Senator Landon or Senator Schuler, if you want to raise your hand to present. Seeing not, we'll walk through this bill. Mr. Chairman, as you know, the Wildlife Trust of Wyoming has been a wonderful resource for the state of Wyoming, working in connection closely with some of our private partners in the NGO world to identify some projects that really enhance Wyoming's wildlife, as well as provide for public safety. And so in doing this work, they have identified a few important projects, two that would involve doing some major improvements to mule deer crossings in the state of Wyoming, and those are outlined on pages 2 and 3. One is the Dry Piney Mule Deer Crossing, which is on US Highway 189 between the towns of Big Piney and LaBarge. And as we know, this is a very important area for mule deer. And so this would authorize funding to be used to construct an underpass so that those animals can safely cross our highway. And this is important because we did hear extensive testimony about the cost of collisions. Obviously, it threatens the health and safety of our travelers on our Wyoming highways, which impacts, not only loss of life and personal injury, but has a toll on insurance rates and just is an expensive thing that happens for our state. And so this proposal would appropriate just under $699,000. And you'll see all of those details for a total of $20,942,000 outlined on page 3. Going on, you'll see there's another project that was identified, the Casey Buffalo Mule Deer Crossing. Similar to the previous crossing, this is was targeted by our Wyoming Game and Fish, as well as others, to provide this improvement. We heard some testimony that they selected underpasses because those are more appropriate for mule deer, and they are more affordable to construct. And then finally, they've identified the Sheridan walk-in invasive grass areas that you'll see outlined on page 6. Essentially, there are some pretty awful noxious weeds that have the names of Medusa head and Ventinata species that have already started to infiltrate about 50,000 acres in Sheridan County. In listening to testimony on this bill, it was described as cheatgrass on crack, something that spreads very quickly and can be really damaging to good rangeland. And so the critical nature of this project, if we can get ahead of it, will hopefully stop the spread of that. And so you'll see the details of where those dollars would be appropriated on page 7. This act would take effect immediately. It would be contained in our session laws. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and certainly welcome support from other members of the TRW committee who have been very instrumental in working this bill.
Thank you, Chairman Ellis. Chairman Landon.
Chairman, thank you. Just wanted to compliment the description that was just given by our good chairman, specifically regarding the project up in Sheridan County and up in the northern part of the state. Senators, one of the things that makes this bill urgent is the fact that we don't want to lose any ground that we have made up there. And so this would allow for these projects, all three, but particularly that one, to get on the ground in a hurry this spring, which is the time that you've got to attack these things. As the chairman from Converse County knows a lot about that sort of thing, crops management and how to control these weeds. These are two of the other two projects, the one above KC and then the one over there south of Big Piney. Those are two of the biggest migration corridors in our state. And so these are three very important projects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to back up the good folks on TRW, the one thing that was kind of interesting to me, actually a couple things, just with the safe passages for our wildlife. Wyoming saves about $3 million a year in collision costs just by having these underpasses or overpasses. About 6,000 animals are hit each year around the state. I mean, if you take a look at our mule deer population, that's huge. And that's who generally gets hit, are the deer. So, and I looked around to see, asked about priorities in terms of where they might go next. And Wyoming Wildlife Federation has a targeted map that you might want to take a look at. In fact, I could probably send that to you. But it targets some other areas that some of you in some of your areas of the state that I think you might be interested in. But just in my area alone, and Senator, the good senator from Kemmerer, we've seen a big difference. I think they had about 80 a year that were getting killed right over in the Kemmerer area. they put that underpass in there, and it takes it down about 80 to 90% when they have the underpasses or the overpasses. So it's a huge difference. So these two projects are definitely important. And then just to tag along with our good chairman, the issue with the two noxious weeds that are unbelievably bad. When you say cheatgrass, and this is cheatgrass on steroids or crack, it's bad. The 50,000 acres that they're going to work on, not only does it improve wildlife habitat, but I think something that all of us might be interested in is, especially after some of the huge fires that we had, is this also improves it mitigates to some degree at least the potential for huge wildfires by doing these kinds of things. And no idea where the seeds came from, but they think maybe Montana, but it's hard to say. The bottom line is all three of these projects really need done, and really appreciate your support for them. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a question for members of the committee. When I look at this, the subsection D on the KC Buffalo, it says mule deer crossings. And I'm wondering why we were discriminating against white-tailed deer, because there's quite a population of white-tailed deer. And so how are they going to sort those out between the mule deer going underneath and the whitetails can't use it? Maybe a little explanation of why the discrimination.
Chairwoman Ellis, you want to take us?
Yeah, I think, the senator from Baggs raises a great question. There's a lot of discussion about maybe hiring some cattle guards that are already out there. They're already employed. Maybe we could redirect their efforts and put them to good work. But in all seriousness, senators, I wanted to apologize, just trying to get all the information out in a format where I could relay it to you. For the background of new members, in 2017, there was a new group called the Wyoming Wildlife and Roadways Initiative that started bringing together more than 130 representatives from government, from non-governmental organizations, as well as scientists, members of the public. And they came together to identify ways to reduce problems with roads and wildlife. And so they formed this initiative implementation team. And since then, they've looked at exhaustively across the state of Wyoming to target where some of our more high intensive needs are. And so a big focus of that was looking at mule deer populations. Certainly we don't want to hurt any white-tailed deer populations or other animals. And they've done a tremendous amount of work in finding those areas where we could get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, in reducing traffic incidences and protecting very critical herd populations of various wildlife. And so they do look at pronghorn migration, they look at mule deer, and I'm sure other animals as well. But the reason that you'll see that mule deer focus is because it is a critical herd for that area. And, like I said, we won't discriminate if other animals want to utilize those crossways as well.
Further questions? Further questions? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I forgot to mention, I think it's pretty important when we start talking about these appropriations, that again, the work was done 2 or 3 years previous to this, and they have a fairly good expenditure already taken care of in the fund. But most of or a good share of the money was donated by private foundations, the Wyoming Wildlife, the Muley Fanatics. I just forgot about maybe Yellowstone. No, that doesn't sound like there's another one that I'm forgetting. There are 3 or 4 different private foundations that donated money to this. And I think that's important that we take a look at that and understand that if they're willing to put up hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's also a meaningful thing for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Perkins, or Chairman Perkins, you had your hand up. Whoop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got this information, but I think we've got a number of new members on the floor, just recently elected, and it may be wise for someone with a good history of the Wildlife Heritage Trust Fund to go back and talk a little bit about it and where this money comes from and how it's leveraged and why this is such an important and good deal for the state of Wyoming.
Senator Hicks, maybe could enlighten us on that one.
Well, that wasn't what I had my hand up for, but I'll take a stab at it. This is a fund that was set up to, and it is the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund. And so this was an initiative that started in the early 2000s to try to build up a trust. And the legislature periodically has put funds into this trust. It is a statutory trust over the years to increase the trust to be able to fund wildlife and natural resource projects. That trust is up to $114 million a year. And what they do is they derive the interest off that, then goes into what they call their income account, which funds projects around the state of Wyoming. Periodically, they get infusions of other nonprofit dollars. We've had everything from, school kids doing penny contributions to large oil and gas companies doing millions of dollars of contribution to the program to help offset and mitigate some of the impacts associated with. Every year we see a project that's called the Large Project Funding Bill. So under the statutory constraints that establish the trust, any project that exceeds $200,000 of appropriation has to come before the legislature. And that's what you see in this bill. So you typically see this bill every year. They do smaller grants on a biannual basis in March and September. Those are gone through or approved by a board appointed by the governor. That board also has to go through Senate confirmation that we review those board members. They make recommendations on anything under $200,000 a year. And I don't know if there's no more questions on that, but it's a bill you're going to see every year. I would tell you most of the funding that comes out of here that we appropriate goes back to those local communities. There's anywhere from dirt contractors to fencing contractors. Most of this money turns back over in your community through those local entities. And so it's just a way that we can make an investment in one of our high value resources, which is our wildlife and natural resources within the state of Wyoming. I don't think there's a community in the state that hasn't been a beneficiary of this program. And when I say the community, I also mean those contractors and those individuals that receive the funding to do these projects within the state of Wyoming. Typically, you'll see on the projects like these is they usually have a fairly substantial match. If you look at the one, I think it had almost $700,000 appropriation to match over $20 million in other funding. A lot of that match will come through either the federal government, in this case, transportation department, but also nonprofit organizations typically match these funds, farm bill programs, but you'll see anywhere from Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Muley Fanatics, a range of nonprofits match these dollars to get this money deployed in these projects implemented for the benefit of the state of Wyoming. But that wasn't my reason I had my hand up, Mr. Chairman. But after that explanation, I forgot what I was going to ask, so I'm going to take my hand down.
Chairman Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the Vice President did a terrific job on that. Really appreciate all the time and effort he's put in on this front through the years. I just wanted to add something that the Vice President alluded to, and that is that this is kind of the tip of the iceberg when we look at these large projects. Each of these years that we consider large projects, in the background is probably as many as 50 or 60 small projects that are underneath that threshold that was alluded to. And so this Wildlife Trust Fund honestly has been, I think, one of the best things that we've ever done in terms of giving us the leverage points to go out there and mitigate some of the things that you're looking at today. These 2 to 3 projects, wildlife corridors and this invasive species stuff, I can't think of very many things that are more important on the wildlife management front and range management front, and we get the leverage to do it. So it's really been a good program. I've been privileged enough to serve on that select committee a couple of times and really enjoyed that experience. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other, Chairman Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And along those lines, the good senator from Natrona County just used the word leveraged. And we heard testimony about how every dollar that they've received from the legislature, they've been able to leverage significantly in private fundraising efforts. In some instances, they've been able to leverage that up to 12 times. And so usually this larger project funding bill is a little bit larger, but because of the year that we've been in, they've held back some. So again, you'll see this bill occur in the future. And just to be clear with everyone, there are no general fund monies that are being expended for these projects. These were dollars that were raised specifically for the purpose of protecting Wyoming's wildlife and natural resources. So happy to answer any additional questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Ellis. Senator or Vice President Hicks, did you come back with that?
Mr. Chairman, I remembered what I was going to ask of the committee members. And so on the invasive grasses, I see that the prime sponsor on that is the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And was there discussions on how they're going to utilize those funds, given that they don't, I think, operate a lot of spraying equipment? Or are they coordinating with the weed and pest? Are they going to hire private contractors to do that? And I see there's other leverage in there. It's a $750,000 project. So are they just the entity that's doing the trust fund application and then is going to pass that off to local weed and pest districts? Just trying to figure out how that project's all going to come together.
All right, Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to pile on a bit for the freshmen in here and the active part of our members. Wildlife Trust is administered with two people. It's probably the most efficient use, in my opinion, of any dollars that are spent out in the legislature. You look at the number of dollars and the way they leverage their board, it's really an outstanding organization. And then I was going to answer the whitetail question with whitetail and mule deer, because living where there's few mule deer and a lot of whitetail, a whitetail, even if you had a good crossing, will either jump off it onto a car or will choose to find a way to crawl through the fence and get in front of one. They'd way rather commit suicide than safely cross the highway.
Senator Cooper.
For the good senator out of Baggs, I would suggest maybe some signage on those crossings might help. If we said no whitetail, or perhaps.
All right, thank you, Senator Cooper. Now, Chairwoman Ellis, maybe we can answer that question, because boy, that one stumped me. Go on.
Yeah, the good senator from Baggs raises a great question. I will do my due diligence and ask how that will work in actuality on the ground with those funds. Thank you.
We'll get that answer for you. Further questions?
Call for the question.
The question has been called. All those in favor of Senator Ellis's motion that when the committee of whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation on House Bill 66. All those in favor, please hold your hand to the screen to vote aye. All those opposed?
It's unanimous. Oh, one no, I'm sorry, one no.
Well,
Nope, it's unanimous. I guess it is. Okay, Chief Clerk. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to make sure my hand wasn't a no vote first, because I'm always a yes vote on that. So we have three bills so far coming up. I'll go ahead and announce them. They happen to be from the hardest working committee in the Senate, all the same committee, corporations. That will be House Bill 15, House Bill 13, and House Bill 27. Encourage your other committees to get your bills out. Show us
Point of
up.
order.
Okay. Senator, Mr. Vice President, sorry.
Is that a debatable motion as to which committee is the hardest working committee in the legislature?
It was a fact stated.
Not when it's the Majority Floor Leader saying it. It's Chairman Landon.
Well, Mr. Chairman, my shirt tail's kind of hanging out a little bit, and I've broken a sweat across this big forehead. I don't know. I can't spur the horse any harder. I'd like to put in a word for the Transportation Committee. Thank you.
Duly noted. Now that, with that vote, and just want to make sure I do this not to get in trouble, House Bill 66 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 15. And if the chief clerk would be so kind as to read us the House bill.
House Bill 15, Department of Transportation Communications Facilities, an act relating to the Department of Transportation, sponsored by corporations. It was referred to your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, who returned a due pass recommendation, voting aye, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott, signed Senator Driscoll, Chairman. It was further reviewed by your committee number 2, Appropriations, who returned a recommendation that it do pass, voting aye, Senator Garou, Hicks, Kinski, Perkins, and Steinmetz, signed Drew Perkins, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. Your pleasure. Majority Floor Leader Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole rise to report and do so with a recommendation that House Bill 15 do pass. And for further explanation, I call on Senator Case.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And I think you're going to like this bill, Mr. Chairman. And it's really started out as a product of the Broadband Task Force. And Mr. Chairman, it came to the Interim Corporations Committee, and we gave it quite a bit of a trim down, Mr. Chairman, because it was very, very prescriptive. And then we got looking at the bill, and then we actually trimmed down the law as well. So I think you're going to like the way this bill turned out, Mr. Chairman. This relates to communications facilities that we know fondly as WyoLink. I think it's clear, near and dear to everyone's heart. And for you new folks, you're going to be hearing about WyoLink and how much it costs for the rest of your lives. And but this is trying to encourage the Department of Transportation to take some of the facilities that they have and lease them out to other entities. And there's been a little bit of that, but not very much of it, Mr. Chairman. And that's been kind of a rub between the Department of Transportation and the legislature. But it's kind of a new world out there, Mr. Chairman. We have a director of the Department of Transportation who is keen to improve broadband in the state of Wyoming. And so he's worked with us on this bill, and we've kind of taken existing law and just cut right to the point, made it permissive for the Department of Transportation to lease out facilities, and made sure that any revenues that come from that leasing of the WyoLink facilities is maintained within the department for the use of WyoLink. Mr. Chairman, we're not talking about a lot of money here. It might be a couple $1,000s a year. So this is not a biggie, and it's not going to solve all our problems. But I think it is an idea how we can do better. So, Mr. Chairman, we can just cut right to it. You can see that everything that's has a strike through, that's old language. And you can just see how cumbersome this was, where upon application by a telecommunications company, if the Public Service Commission determines that it's necessary to provide, you have a determination, and then the commission down in the language that's deleted between lines 8 and 21 gets involved in the lease rate, and it just goes on and on and on. It's kind of crazy. Well, we streamlined everything here, and I think this was good work by the Corporations Committee in the interim. But basically it says now the entirety of the language is, upon application by a telecommunications company, the Wyoming Department of Transportation, notice there was a shall and now it's a may, it's permissive, may lease excess capacity on any state-funded communications infrastructure owned by the Department of Transportation to the telecommunications company. I'm going clear down to line 21. All monies received from any lease executed pursuant to this section shall be deposited into the WyoLink Tower Maintenance Account, which is hereby created. Funds in the account are continuously appropriated to the department and shall only be used to maintain, reinforce, and repair the WireLink network and towers. As used in this section, we have a definition of broadband provider, which is already in law, so we're referring to another place in law. And we want to be clear that when we talk about telecommunications company, that means a broadband provider. That is the entirety of the new bill. All it is permissive. It says, you know, Department of Transportation, we've had to drag you kicking and screaming to this because it was a forced deal. Now, if you can find a way to bring in some income to support the system, you get to keep it. And that's all it is. And happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Kays. Chairman Landon, question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add to the words of the good chairman from Lander. I served on your behalf, Mr. Chairman, on the Broadband Task Force, which honestly was a committee that worked very, very hard on the issue of that we're all very much aware of. And that is that throughout the state of Wyoming, we have a lot of areas that are behind the rest of the world. And the president called and we visited early and often throughout the interim with regard to what can we do to get some more broadband out there. And so with that said, you're going to see, I hope, more than just this bill that came out of that broadband task force. This one came through the Corporations Committee, and my former mates on corporations have done good work here to kind of tighten this up and create a possibility for us where we might just add to our broadband capability out there or our ability to access. It's not going to solve all the problems, but you're going to see some rights of way things that we tried to do. And again, those will come up through the committees and you'll see those later. But Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good little bill that's got a chance to do us some good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I would just elaborate on one thing. Members may hear some instances in their communities where these towers were not able to be used for particular equipment. There's two reasons that may happen. One, the towers are designed to support what's needed for the WireLink, and some of the broadband equipment may be too heavy or have some other problems such that the tower simply can't safely support it. So that would be one possibility, Mr. Chairman. The other thing that may happen, there were, I believe it was 17 of these towers that were funded entirely by the federal government, and the federal government will not let us use them this way. Why they're that way, I don't know. It's irrational, but that's the federal government for you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Further comments? Oh, Senator Hicks or Mr. Vice President, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a question on the existing language. If we go to line 6 and 7, where it says state-funded communication infrastructure, existing language owned by the Department of Transportation. Is it owned by the Department of Transportation or is it operated by the Department of Transportation? I mean, it's a nuance, but the way it says here, they own it, it's state-funded. So I'm just curious if there's anything there that makes any difference.
Let's see, Senator Case, want to field that one?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just note that is old language, there might be exceptions to that. Maybe somebody from the Department of Transportation that's listening in could weigh in on that. That is definitely old language, so we didn't mess with that. It seems like it'd be simple to say owned or operated by or something like that, but that is old language.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is to Chairman Case. I just want to understand exactly what's going on. We have state-owned or funded towers, and we're going to allow the Department of Transportation to lease the towers or the usage of them to private companies to extend broadband. Is that what we're doing?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Case, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, indeed, that's exactly what we're doing. A lot of people in the past, WildLink's been around a while, and there have been many, many folks that have suggested that the facilities owned and making up WildLink could have public benefits beyond the public safety communication system. So it has been suggested before, and there has been an attempt at it with this old language about having the PSC involved, and it really related to the fact that in general, I would say that the Department of Transportation didn't want to share its facilities. That was just the way it was. And so the previous language was trying to get them to do so and had the PSC involved. But the truth is now the department is open-minded about doing this and sees the benefit of sharing facilities. But the problem before is the money would go to the general fund. Now the money would actually go to support WildLink, which I think you probably already know, good senators, that this is a very expensive proposition and we could use all the help we could get to get it funded. So indeed, that is exactly right. You got a tower sticking up, it can cover a lot of area. Why not allow that tower to be shared by other entities? It's not requiring it though, it's totally permissive. So in the case where the towers can't handle it, or there might be other security reasons, or maybe the power is inadequate, they don't have to do that, but they have every incentive to do so if they can, because the money stays with the department.
Senator Cost, did you have a question? Did you get it answered?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did. I'll ask it because of 17 of the towers owned by the feds. I'm wondering how many are owned that are not federally owned that are available around the state. I know there's been some real challenges with mountainous areas and all getting much communication on some of those. And so I was just wondering how many are going to be effective if there's 17 of them that are not usable.
Thank you, Senator Costa. Other questions? Other questions? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, we just had this number given in a committee a little while ago. It's over 90 towers are part of this system. And it's not just really limited to the towers. There are other facilities as well. There might be ducts and conduits. I don't know what's all involved, but the majority would potentially be available. I do need to point out that this is not a panacea. A lot of these WildLink towers are in very remote areas, so they don't really catch a lot of people, so to speak. And they support a different type of radio system than the broadband that would be attempted to be placed on them. But potentially they would do some good.
Test.
Okay, Chairman Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to add to the good thoughts just shared, I wanted to come back to the senator from Laramie County. That is exactly right. A lot of these towers may not be appropriate. But the whole idea and the thrust of the select committee throughout the last year was to try to figure out any leverage points we could give folks in the private sector to get out there and provide broadband service. It might be possible, for example, in a place where a telecommunications company may not want to lay some fiber down or to connect to a tower, put their own tower up simply because there isn't enough population out there to have a return on investment. But what if they could lease one of these towers and provide that service to our citizens out in the remote parts of the state? So as I said before, it's not necessarily a silver bullet, but it's a pretty good one to give us a chance out there. And I'm all for public-private partnerships whenever we can create them. Thank you.
Sorry. Further questions? Looking.
Question.
Question been called. Okay, all those.
Mr. Chairman.
Point of order.
Point of order, what did I do? I'm sorry.
Senator James would like to weigh in.
I was squinching back and forth and I thought I saw a hand. No, I'm sorry. Senator James, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious. Last time I heard, WildLink wasn't fully operational and they're still having a lot of issues. And I was just curious if it was actually fully functioning yet and all the towers were up and running. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Obama, Mr. Chairman Perkins.
Just in response to that, WildLink's been operating for well over, WildLink's probably been operating for close to 15 to 16 years. It continues to expand. They continue to find and find additional coverage. It's mostly for emergency operations. And one of the intents was to provide significant interoperability between all the different first responding agencies, whether they're fire, law enforcement, or other types of emergency personnel. So that it has been functioning for quite a long time. We've had, for the years we've appropriated money to update the consoles. We've appropriated temporary towers. We've appropriated money for additional new towers to provide increase its reach and scope. So well, it's turned out to be a thorn in the side because originally it was in the post 9/11 world where there was a ton of Homeland Security grants that came out. That's what kind of started that. And there have been a few missteps in the creation and maintenance of it, but overall it is a functional and quite frankly, it's how a lot of our first responders communicate, particularly in remote regions of the state when there are not other cell towers or other forms. And so anyway, it's like I say, it's like I think it's already been noted. It's been a thorn in the side of the legislature because it does cost money. But at the end of the day, most of our first responding and public safety organizations and efforts do require the expenditure of public funds. And I'm sure those who worked on the committee can expand more on that. Thank you.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I have a question for my colleague from Lander. The fiscal note says that they anticipate $500 per year per tower. And I wonder if you know where they got that number from. And I took the liberty of reaching out to somebody who's done some work for the state of Wyoming in that regard, data centers and such. And he said that it could be quite a bit more money depending on exactly what the assets are that the state has. So I'm curious whether WYDOT has the sophistication necessary to really take advantage of this and get the full value of the asset. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator James, you want to take another question there?
It was just more of a follow-up. I mean, the reason why I asked that was because that was a concern of first responders, is that they didn't have functioning WildLink radios, and that they were actually using digital ham radios that were next to their WildLink equipment. So that's where that question had come from, and that was very recently, like within the last year. And they said that they've never had functioning WildLink radio. So that's where that came from. So thank you.
Okay, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, far be it for me to defend WildLink, but puts me, I do have a bit of a telecommunications background. I know it's an extremely expensive system, maybe much more than it needs to be and should be, or we want it to be, or we could get along with less. But I also do understand that as far as the systems developed across the United States in the post 9/11 world, Wyoming actually achieved a level of interoperability for its first responders, everything from federal agencies to state, local, unequaled in the United States if you really were to drill down on that. So that is an amazing thing. It's a very big state to cover. It's very expensive to cover because there are a lot of commercial towers that they could have used, and we have big open spaces, and to cover the big open is the most difficult part. So I will say that on behalf of it. I am sure that local departments have their struggles. I'll tell you what the problem with local departments and agencies is the equipment costs themselves. So it's possible that some of them don't have the equipment necessary to access WyoLink in the way that is meaningful and should be. I'm sure that's a problem because local entities have local budgets, local priorities about equipment. And I know there's also a problem with equipment wearing out. Some of the there's basically one big company that makes a lot of radios, and I know that they're trying to change those out. And so I can't answer. I bet it's absolutely true that we have the best theoretically operable system that's very expensive, I'll give you that. But at the same time, some of our local participants are having a difficulty with that. Mr. Chairman, with regard to the question about the low amount of revenues, I believe it was the good senator from Sheridan County. So it's an estimate provided by the department. They're probably not really in the business. I once had worked for Coopers and Lybrand one time and did right-of-way and tower leases. And I think there is more money potentially available. Certainly in urban areas, towers, space on a tower is a very hot commodity. But at least with this bill, they have the incentive to actually try to maximize those revenues because it underwrites the cost of that equipment and the maintenance of that equipment, which they didn't have that incentive before because it went to the general fund. So maybe we will see some bigger numbers and more. And I'll tell you, once the word gets out on the street that these towers are available and that the Department of Transportation is more amenable to leasing them, I think we'll get more interest. More interest can only mean a good thing for driving those prices up. And I do hope the good senator who's on the Appropriations Committee will keep track of that, and I'll be very interested in the outcome. I know he will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good discussion. We got, Senator McCowan. No more comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question to make sure I understand this. The discussion's getting a little confusing. We're actually just leasing space on the tower. None of the WyoLink equipment that's on the tower that's going to be next to what we're leasing has anything to do with the lease of what we're putting up there. Is that correct?
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly correct. And actually, it's pretty common in the telecommunications industry to have share equipment and space on towers and things like that. There's ways that they can secure the equipment. And since the Department of Transportation will control the tower, they'll control access to the tower, and they'll be able to make sure that the state of Wyoming equipment is well protected and against power surges and everything. So it'll be well handled. It's very common practice in the industry. Thank you for the question.
Okay, it looks like we're just about in the home stretch here. Everybody okay? All right. Sensing you're ready, all those in favor of Majority Floor Leader Driscoll's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation that House Bill 15 do pass. Please, if you know why, please raise your hand to the screen. Opposed?
No opposed.
So House Bill 15 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Our next bill for your consideration is House Bill 13. And will the Chief Reading Clerk please read the House Bill?
House Bill 13, Alcoholic Beverage Regulation, an act relating to the regulation of alcohol and malt beverages, sponsored by corporations. It was referred to Committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, who returned a due pass amended recommendation to the Senate, voting ayes, Senators Boner, Nethercott, and Scott. Conflict, Senators Case and Driscoll. Signed, Senator Driscoll, Chairman.
Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole rise to report it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 13 do pass. And for further explanation, I hand off to Senator Nethercott.
Good Chairman Nethercott. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good senators and some not so good senators, or some sort of good senators. I have before you House Bill 13, which is alcohol beverage regulation, which we typically don't like, but I assure you this alcohol bill is right up your alley. The work is the culmination of the cooperation over the last 2 years between the Wyoming State Liquor Association and the Wyoming Liquor Division. And so the Corporations Committee is the home agency of the Wyoming Liquor Division. And so we hear from them often, as you're familiar with. Pretty much each year we do an update to our liquor laws. And this bill continues some of that work that we've done in the past by modernizing and providing those business-friendly updates we all know and love to our alcohol beverage control laws. So it's a long bill, but it's actually not as bad as it looks. The first 11 pages doesn't do anything substantively. It simply restructures the law. It separates out microbreweries and winery law, just so it's easier to navigate for consumers and retailers to understand and work through. So no substantive changes, again, from pages 1 through 11 of the bill. It's just that restructuring as mentioned. Starting on page 11, the delivery law is created to both codify and install state-level sideboards for local delivery of alcoholic beverages. So again, there's been practice on the ground based on Attorney General opinions that has been underway for decades. And they're just a desire as we go ahead and update this particular statutory section to codify that into the law. And so that's what you see on page 11. There is a standing committee amendment, if I can have that read in.
Will you please read in the standing committee amendment?
House Bill 13, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 12, line 5.
So good senators, we just completed page 11. So that standing committee amendment that you see is on page 12. I will move that standing committee amendment and ask for your favorable consideration, but I'll continue to explain the bill and that amendment. Right here, we're on deliveries. And that amendment, I've got to rotate screens here, goes into page 12, line 5, and it states, all deliveries under this subsection shall be completed during the licensee's remaining operating hours on the same day the alcoholic liquors or malt beverages are removed from the inventory of the licensed premise. This particular amendment really reflects the need to ensure that there are appropriate sideboards, that this particular availability what's been going on for decades for the delivery of alcohol, that there are those safety mechanisms in place, and that is one of those amendments supported by the stakeholders that helps achieve those safety measures. Moving through the bill, on page 14, we add the current licenses to the definition in Title 12 in the statutory section, but no new licenses are being created by this bill. Again, going back to the purpose of the bill, which is kind of just updating the liquor laws and not really doing a great deal substantively. On page 15, there's some archaic restrictions that are from really from the 70s concerning the restaurant liquor licenses. And so it really isn't consistent with how we operate restaurants and liquor licenses now. And so that particular change reflects what's really going on with our restaurants. On pages 16 and 17, the bill removes the requirement for industry representatives to be residents, bringing this law into compliance with Supreme Court cases. So there's been a lot of litigation kind of over liquor laws over the years. Most recently in 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court case of Granholm. And equality and equity amongst the states, of course, and that Commerce Clause that we're all familiar with is relevant as well as that applies to this piece. And so we are removing and making our laws compliant with Supreme Court precedent. It further clarifies language that the local microbrewery, winery, and distillery owners can legally represent their own products. And so they don't need to get a industry representative, that those Wyoming businesses can be their own representatives here in our own state. And that makes a whole lot of sense. Pages 18 and 19 increases the amount of wine that can be direct shipped into Wyoming from 4 cases to 12. I think something we all could get behind. This actually is not that profound. Most of our surrounding states have that level of direct ship as well, and it's consistent with industry practice. It's certainly something that the Joint Committee and the Senate Committee supported. So that increase also applies to the in-state wineries as well. Page 20, moving through the bill, deletes the requirement to post a public notice at the physical location by the licensing authority. Also one of those kind of antiquated provisions from the 30s, actually, that the liquor division needs to go around and put that sticker on the window in those locations. And really, what really is happening, that notice is provided on retailers' websites or other locations, but removes that kind of antiquated piece. And there's just a couple of states that still have that, who haven't updated their laws yet. On page 23, retailers will also be able to ship 12 cases of wine within the state. Again, this is bringing our laws into compliance with U.S. Supreme Court precedents. So not really a policy decision for this body to make, but making our laws consistent with what the U.S. Supreme Court states. On pages 26 and 27, it eliminates the room requirement and other archaic restrictions for restaurant liquor licenses. Again, we've seen a change in how our restaurants' relationship with liquor and how consumers are interacting with our retailers. So the remainder of the bill is cleanup language and grants greater authority to local licensing authorities, especially for the 24-hour permits, excuse me. And there's also the language that our friends across the hall provided an amendment that employees all must be 18 years of age to enter into a dispensing area. So good senators, good and sort of good senators, there's that amendment that we have to deal with, going back to page 11, that provides some of those sideboards associated with deliveries of alcohol. Right now, I'd stand for questions on the amendment now that you have heard the bill and how it works together. I'd ask for your favorable consideration on the amendment as well.
Question.
Thank you, Chairman Nethercott. Questions on the amendment? Question having been called for. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion to adopt a standing committee amendment on House Bill 13, please say aye by holding your hand to the screen. Those opposed?
No opposed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chief Clerk. Now back to the bill. Senator Kinski.
So to the chairman of the presenter of the bill, I want to say thank you. Long time in coming. I've got a couple long stories that I won't bore people with, but it's taken about 40 years to get at least the restaurant portion of this to something as sensible as what you're seeing in this bill. And I think it's greatly appreciated, be greatly appreciated by the restaurant folks, as well as local cities and towns that have been dealing with dual enforcement interpretations from both their own city clerks as well as the state. And looks like a great job. Congratulations.
Further questions or statements of adulation? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I would point out on page 18, and it's in the bill and another place too, where we're going to the 108 liters of manufactured wine that can be directly purchased. Mr. Chairman, that was something your Joint Interim Corporations
Put it in
Committee.
that chair right there. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, you continue, Senator. Sorry about that.
Mr. Chairman, the 108 liters of wine, that was something that your joint committee in the interim put in the bill. There is discretion as to how much we allow there. And this was the judgment that we had. I think this is a pretty common figure.
Thank you. Further questions? Vice President Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a question if we go to page 16 and under 12-2-201, just an explanation as to why we cannot grant a license to a brewery and a microbrewery to the same producers. So what issue are we resolving here that somebody couldn't have a license for two different activities?
Okay, hold that question one moment. Let's go to Senator Perkins. You had a question? Or Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the other question I'd have is, what effect, if any, does this bill have on the operations of the liquor warehouse? And do we need to be looking at any changes regarding its operations based upon the effects of this bill?
Okay, Senator Nethercott. Wait a minute, one more. You want to take one more? Senator Hutchings.
Quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Granholm decision, I heard over and over, we're making laws to comply with the precedents of the Supreme Court. What is the decision given in the Granholm decision that makes this so important to put it into law in Wyoming? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll take three questions. Senator Nethercott, you want to take a swing at those?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, and certainly members of the Corporations Committee can add in as well. The question concerning the liquor warehouse, I don't believe it will impact the liquor warehouse at all. Keep in mind that this bill is a reflection of work over the last really 2-3 years involving the liquor division, which is connected to the warehouse. And so they're aware of the requirements in the bill, and so they didn't indicate that there would be any significant impact associated with it. And I'm sure that's the nexus is there with the direct ship of wineries, but they don't believe that it will have an impact in a way that was discussed in any kind of meaningful way. The prohibition from the Vice President concerning microbreweries and breweries, I can't speak to that directly, but my instinct is it's a long, slow process to walk us back from prohibition and the tight regulation associated with our liquor laws, and small steps. And that's really what I think that's reflective of, particularly in Wyoming. And so how that also connects to the good senator from Laramie County's question about making these laws consistent with U.S. Supreme Court precedent. As the country's, we've seen kind of an explosion or a trend, I think, nationally in the United States concerning kind of microbreweries becoming more popular, as well as distilleries and spirits and different types of ways for alcohol consumption to be sold and consumed. And as a result of those increasing consumer behaviors, there's been a desire to access more consumers, right? There's a greater supply, there's a business need, and they want to be able to distribute those products nationally to a greater market. as a result of the country's kind of pocketed or statewide laws concerning alcohol, because it's such a unique, culturally relevant thing. I mean, some states you can't sell liquor on Sundays, you know, some close down pretty early, and there's lots of requirements and different laws associated with the consumption of alcohol. It was difficult for many of these retailers nationwide to be able to navigate those different state laws. And some were really prohibited as a result of that. And they challenged that all the way up to the US Supreme Court in many ways. And the US Supreme Court identified the basis of their concerns and allowed for greater ability to access a national consumer market, essentially. And that's the genesis of a lot of those laws, kind of in a practical nutshell. And I can certainly provide you the links to the cases and you can read them. You know, but it does trigger conversations that we've had in our state concerning the Commerce Clause as well. So restricting a product from one state to the next. I know we feel very sensitive about that with coal. The same is true for liquor. Why we in Wyoming can't ship our distilleries out of state because they don't want them, or a certain amount, triggers issues with the Commerce Clause. So that's it in a nutshell. And again, those cases are pretty interesting and they're decided on pretty tight margins. So it'll be interesting to see how that might change in the future.
Okay, Chairman Scott and then Chairman Case. Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, further to elaborate on the legal framework here, I think as a general rule, we have to be very careful about provisions that favor local manufacturers, local business people, as opposed to those who would sell from the outside, because we wind up burdening interstate commerce that the feds clearly have a right to regulate. Liquor is complicated by the provision in the repeal of prohibition in that constitutional amendment that you can't import liquor into a state in violation of the laws thereof. And how does that play with the Commerce Clause? And that basically got settled that these things, yes, with liquor as with everything else, you can't discriminate against interstate commerce. So that's a good deal of the relevance here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Case.
And Mr. Chairman, just to pile on, that's precisely correct. Granholm versus Held, I think it's Held. It was a 2005 case. It went to the Supreme Court, and it ruled that the laws of New York and Michigan, and in New York and Michigan, they were permitting in-state wineries to do shipments directly to consumers, but they prohibited out-of-state wineries to make the same shipment. So that's where the Commerce Clause comes in. And the court ruled that that was unconstitutional. The arguments in the case were people invoked the 21st Amendment of the Constitution, which was, of course, the amendment that ended prohibition, and New York and Michigan argued that they could do anything they want because of the amendment to the Constitution that eliminated prohibition, let them do that. But the Supreme Court said, no, the Commerce Clause is still superior. So that's the gist of it as I understand it. You get the amount of law school that I paid for, which was not that.
Further questions? Ms. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back to the explanation on page 16 of 12-2-201. And if it's just a prohibition thing, it looks to me like what it really is a revenue raising bill, because the way it's structured, wholesale license for sale of malt beverage, we just get to sell more licenses is all we're doing. And so I'm just wondering if we just had a repealer on that section, what kind of mischief, if any, that would create. Only thing, I just can't see what this accomplishes without, why do we need it? Why would we say you can have a business as a brewery and we'll license that? But if you want to have a microbrewery and you're the same company, you can't have a license for your microbrewery. So would a repealer be in order here, Madam Chairman?
Any other questions? Okay, Madam Chairman, my good friend and chair of the Journal Committee that I serve with, Senator Cole.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question on this bill, and it revolves around page 23, line 14 and 13. When you were striking out the language of beyond a 5-mile zone around incorporated cities and towns, I think that has a very profound effect on the current, I want to call it détente around the buffers around cities, and particularly in Sweetwater County. I dealt with this as a commissioner. This is a unique area. I think I'm not sure of the need for this change, and I'd like to hear the reason why it was stricken. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Chairman Nethercott, you ready to take those two on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am. Of course. You know, always a policy decision to the Vice President concerning, you know, untying the liquor laws in such a way. But my experience on the committee has been tread lightly, as it creates controversy that is always unexpected and compelling and confounding all at the same time. But, you know, those are policy decisions for the body to consider. The removal of the 5-mile radius, that's on page 23 or page 26. I don't know. I did see it. I don't recall why we did that. You know, my guess is that it's antiquated and it shouldn't be listed in statute and really allow the local authorities greater discretion over where those permits should be located. It is my recollection of the basis for that. And so those counties and cities and towns in those communities that are giving those permits are better suited to make those determinations than our state laws. And so any help from the committee members would be helpful, but that's my recollection.
Okay, anyone else? Let's see. Good discussion so far. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on the page 12, where they have breweries and microbreweries, Mr. Chairman, my question for somebody who's thinking about changing that is, are there any breweries in the state of Wyoming, or are all our brewing activities microbreweries?
Okay. Anything? Chairman Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to come back to the good senator from Sweetwater County, and you know, the chairman who's managing this bill on the floor and doing a great job of it is exactly right. I think really the conversation, as I recall it from the last interim, really revolved around that local control aspect. And the more we looked at, well, you can be unlimited beyond a 5-mile zone, but everybody inside that 5-mile zone, there's leverage to disallow. And so we just felt like the local entities probably had the ability to govern better than we can do at the state level like that. So we can certainly reach out to those who testified and get some information back on that, but that's my recollection. So.
Okay, Chairman Nethercott.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just reviewing some of my notes here. I do have that microbreweries are allowed to hold a malt beverage wholesaler's license.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
Making sure that's clear for the body.
Okay, so up. Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to comment on the situation, it's kind of unique and probably not well known unless you had been involved with it before within the city, a larger city, and a county. The issue is profound. These changes we're talking about will drive folks to run out to the nearby county, the border of the city limits, and liquor up there, and I guess go off to wherever they go. And I'm not against buying alcohol, but the issue will be between the cities and the county, and the issue of law enforcement it's going to entail, the issue of the reason why there was a buffer zone. It's a lot more than I think trying to preclude free trade or business, because I'm all for that. You are in fact changing a structure, I think, that's I think not really well understood at this point. I'll try to do my best to convey information to the rest of the body. I will put forth an amendment. I will vote for this currently today to look forward to hopefully improving this and having a better product. But I wish everyone to keep an open mind, and thank you for the consideration that I would in the future ask for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions, comments? Looking, making sure I got everybody. Okay. Question being called for? Sounds like me. Okay. All those in favor of Majority Floor Leader Driscoll's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation, House Bill 13. All those in favor signify by saying aye by holding your hand to the screen. Those opposed?
Seeing no opposed.
No opposed. House Bill 13 is passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 27. Will the chief clerk please read the House bill?
House Bill 27, Business Code Revisions, an act relating to businesses, sponsored by corporations. It was referred to corporations, elections, and political subdivisions, who returned a due pass recommendation to the Senate. Voting aye, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, and Nethercott. Senator Scott, no. Signed, Senator Driscoll, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Majority Floor Leader Driscoll? Oh, can't hear you. Oh, we still can't hear you.
I'll go back to his office.
I got it. I'm here. Sorry.
Sorry, we missed you on that. Go ahead.
I was muted, my bad. Mr. Chairman, I move that the Standing Committee of the whole rises to report and do so with a recommendation that House Bill 27 do pass. And for further explanation, I ask you to call on the great Senator Boner.
You're on mute.
I'm not anymore.
Okay.
The great Senator Boner.
Well, I suppose that'd be me. Not sure about the great part, but I'll take the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a product of the interim work of the Corporations Committee at the request of the Secretary of State's office, dealing specifically with the business code that they, of course, deal with on a regular basis, and a few different themes throughout this bill. First of all, this bill addresses inconsistent language in Titles 17 and 40. It also addresses some of the necessary budget reductions tied to the first 10% reductions in the Secretary of State's office. And so those are kind of the broad strokes and the need for the bill. Specifically, when it comes to budget reductions, we're looking at changing the mailing notice requirements. So it's a 33-page bill, and you'll see there's some repetitive language throughout. I'm going to go through, not necessarily in a sequential order page by page, but talk about the different, I guess, the 5 different themes, if you will, in the bill. First one deals with basically rulemaking authority in the Secretary of State's office, and stipulating that the Secretary has the power to perform the duties required in the statutes. Some are reinstating, dealing with reinstating revocations for out-of-state nonprofits. We also deal with refusal to file documents. If you have some issues with your paperwork and need it corrected, we're changing up some procedures there. We're talking about converting one entity to another when it comes to your businesses. And then we'll finally tackle those budget reductions. So first and foremost, dealing with the powers of Secretary of State. This is simply adding in ability for the Secretary of State to go through and basically have rulemaking authority to actually carry out the requirements in our statutes. And so you'll see that throughout the bill, and when it comes to limited partnership acts, the Uniform Limited Partnership Act, and the trade names registration. And so simply adding in what I'm guessing is an oversight, and they're just looking for consistency, ensuring the Secretary of State technically has the power to perform the duties and has rulemaking authority to actually carry it out. The second component deals with reinstatement of nonprofits, especially if they're what is called a foreign entity, and that says anything formed outside the state. So right now, domestic and anything outside the state, as far as nonprofits, have the ability to reinstate their entity within 2 years after administratively dissolving or revoking the entity for a failure to provide an annual report or for not retaining a registered agent in Wyoming. And so what this does is it allows these out-of-state nonprofits to reinstate, mirrors the current law for a domestic nonprofit, and that's on page 2, line 8, going through page 4, ending on line 11. So that's that second element of the bill. Moving on to the third element, talking about some consistency with the refusal to file documents. So right now, as maybe some of us have experienced, the Secretary of State has the authority to refuse documents if you're filing for a new business, for example, if they don't contain all the required information, or if there's inconsistencies, basically if something needs corrected. So what this does, it requires the Secretary of State's office in 17-16-125 to return the document with an explanation for the refusal within 15 days of submission. So, and I could go through the laundry list if folks like later, but basically it requires consistency for that 15-day time period required for a response through all different types of entities. So it doesn't matter if you're an LLC or a limited partnership or a nonprofit, that same 15-day deadline is going to be consistent throughout all the different entities that you can register as in the state of Wyoming. The fourth amendment or component, I guess you could say, deals with when you convert from one entity to another. The Secretary of State's office came across some situations where an entity can pay less for forming as one type of entity, then those entities convert to another, presumably more expensive type of entity. And so on page 21, lines 22 and 23, all the way up till page 22, line 2, it basically provides that if no fee is set in statute, they can go ahead and apply a conversion fee that would plug the gap there as it was. And finally, the last element is dealing with some of the things the Secretary of State's office had to do to comply with the recent budget reductions. This once again deals with a common theme we've had here in the past few days pertaining to mailing of notice to these entities. So notices are renewals for trademark. For example, it's notices for those who have not filed their annual paperwork at the due date, and dissolution notices if they become inactive for failure to file that annual report. And so it's important to point out that each month the Secretary of State's office, the business division, mails out about 12,000 notices. That's about 156,000 mailings a year. That costs about almost $86,000. So that, in context of the entire mailing budget, that's not quite half. It's the overall budget is $175,000 for a biennium. Excuse me, for a biennium. So in order to meet those 10% cuts, looking to reduce the mailing budget by about $143,000. So the amendments here would allow the Secretary of State to send electronic notices. So for additional context, it's important to point out that they have almost 250,000 active entities on file with the Secretary of State. Only 113 entities have not provided an email address. So they feel comfortable that they can work with anybody who maybe doesn't have an email address to go ahead and rely on the electronic notices, remove the redundancy, and save the state of Wyoming some money when it comes to those paper mailings for those reminders. So that's the bill dealing with those changes. Once again, we're looking at significant cost savings in the mailing fees by going to an electronic system. And this is something we did spend a little bit of time in committee questioning the Secretary of State's office, making sure that, personally, as somebody who represents a pretty rural district, wanted to make sure that nobody's going to be left behind. And I left the committee meeting feel comfortable that they would be able to handle all of any potential issues with the 113 entities that do not have an email address. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the bill in its entirety. Certainly, we can take specific questions on its contents.
That was great, Chairman Boner. Any questions? Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and I was the no vote in committee. And it has to do with the way the Secretary of State's office handled its reductions. They have taken a pretty extreme position that they won't mail anything out to anybody. And I think it affects the situation where people don't have adequate internet or broadband, or don't have any at all, which you do have in some of the rural areas. And that affects some of the corporations. It affects some of the corporations that are being economical by using family members as their registered agents. But it's broader than just that. Frankly, about 90% of this bill is okay, but what we really need to do in this area, they needed to reduce their personnel by one position, I think, rather than take all the cuts in where they were providing service to people. It's a problem, and I thought that we needed to have some correction there. And Mr. Chairman, that's why I voted no.
Okay, thank you, Senator Scott. Further questions, comments? Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, a question for my friend from Bates Creek. Does he intend to bring an amendment that would fix that so that those who wanted to continue to receive by mail could, and thereby garner his support for the legislation?
Mr. Chairman, it's broad enough. Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, it's broad enough that a single amendment probably wouldn't cover it. I think the real thing that needs to be done is probably a budget amendment to cut a position out.
Okay. Further questions? Chairman Perkins. Whoop, you muted yourself. There you
I went from mute to not to unmute, huh? And then back again. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, my question has to do with their provision on page 23, specifically the provision with respect to 1728-104. And as I understand it, I mean, what concerns me about this is not so much some notice, but specifically with service of process. So generally, when we're talking service of process, one of the ways that you can serve a company when you begin a lawsuit against a corporation or other entity, in this case, I think we're talking about corporations, if you can't locate them within a registered agent within the state, then you can serve the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State is obligated to serve them. Usually, I think the current law is by certified mail, return receipt requested, and so usually, I mean, so really, this is about service of process. In any other instance, and almost any other instance, and if you're an in-state person, you're being sued, you have a process server or a deputy sheriff show up on your door and serve you or one of your employees, or if it's you personally at your home, someone over the age of 14, and actually hands someone those documents. And so the beginning of this lawsuit, ultimately you're not, this would allow them to be served to begin a lawsuit by electronic means. So the Secretary of State simply forwards that address. I suppose that's, I mean, I'm thinking out loud here, but ultimately, I mean, that just seems like it's in the beginning of a lawsuit that to me, it seems a little extraordinary that you could serve it by email when I don't think you can get away with that in almost any other instance. And the good chairman of Judiciary may have a comment on this. She certainly does a heck of a lot more litigation than I do. I'm just concerned about that. And I'd appreciate some additional discussion or comment about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Endicott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the conversation deserves more review on second and third reading. There is a requirement on page 24, lines 18 through 19, that the applicant must provide the email address where service will be provided. And one of the protective measures I think that does is it says, don't give me your junk email account, right? You need to give the Secretary of State's office the email account that you will be checking that is sacred, for lack of a better term, for where you might get sued. And that's if traditional means are not available for service of process to the registered agent. And I think that's important. And so then there's that piece that the applicant is required to provide that email address specifically as it relates to service of process and for that purpose. And so there's that. But then two, again, one of the purposes behind this is the reduction of mail. And I think as the good senator from Natrona County pointed out, no one picks up their certified mail. And so they don't receive the litigation when they don't pick up their certified mail when it goes to their address for the registered agent. And so this provides other means to be delivered with clear knowledge to the applicant that they might receive litigation via electronically. I do think it's a pretty profound move. And I do think it would be the first area in the law to do that. And something that certainly warrants further consideration, but I have more confidence in our email than our US Post Office. So, that's something to think about.
Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not much to add, just pointing out that this does not remove the possibility of a mail attempting to communicate via normal mail. Paragraph B is still in effect. It does give wide discretion to the Secretary of State's office, but obviously there's some sideboards there. They're going to, you have to have no registered agent. You have to use reasonable due diligence to service the individual. So just point out that there are some sideboards and we're not really taking anything off the table. We're adding options.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think the chairman of the Appropriations Committee may be onto something here, particularly when it gets regard to the service for lawsuits. The email address you know, a lot of people have a junk email address and will give it under these circumstances, not understanding the possible consequences. And I know at times when all I've got's the state email address. That gets so much stuff, I just don't use it part of the year because there's so much junk in it. And I've on occasion had to give out the email address of a friend because I didn't have one of my own. And you get one of these forms, they won't accept it without. So I think there's real danger in using some of these as the exclusive way of getting notice on a lawsuit.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Senator Kinski.
Yeah, the more I think about the points from the two senators from Natrona County, the more I'm inclined to the senator from Bates Creek's position. I'm having some second thoughts. Email's wonderful, but there are spam filters and junk filters. I've had very important mail end up in a spam box just because the tools think they're pretty good at sorting things out, and most of the time they are. And I don't know, when it comes to litigation, there's just something about somebody showing up wearing a badge and a gun on their hip, handing you a piece of paper really makes you pay attention. As opposed to a being and a voice saying, "You've got mail." I don't know. I'll support it on first reading, but I'm getting a little uneasy on this.
Well, good man has a point. Chair Nethercutt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think this transition to the modern world is hard, and something that our courts obviously struggle with as well too. But one thing that is important is to go back and read where this provision is going in. If there would be an amendment, potentially it would be 23 lines 15 through 17. But, I think E has its place. So the language currently reads, if a service on a business entity, which is what we're talking about, if a business entity has no registered agent, which of course they should, or the agent cannot with reasonable diligence be served, so they have to still be served first. So you have to attempt service of process with the man in the badge or some other random person showing up and knocking on the door. But of course, so many of these businesses don't have brick and mortar, right? They're something else entirely. So if with reasonable diligence, the sheriff can't show up, the entity may be served by registered or certified mail, return receipt requested, addressed to the entity at its principal office. Service is perfected under this subsection at the earliest of the date the entity receives the mail, the date shown on the return receipt, if signed, either manually or in facsimile. I'm sure that will happen. So we allow fax returns. Very interesting. And then 5 days or 5 days after its deposit in the United States mail as evidenced by the postmark, if mailed postpaid and correctly addressed. So there needs to be no acknowledgement that they received it. It's just 5 days after it's dropped in a mailbox somewhere, it's deemed served after 5 days. I don't know what evil we're trying to correct here, but I think it's probably 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And again, I trust electronic transmission more than I trust the U.S. Post Office at this point.
Second time for that. Chairman Perkins.
Thank you. And I don't disagree with anything our good chairwoman from our judiciary said. And to be absolutely clear, most of my concern is not for the out-of-state entity who hasn't kept a registered office, doesn't have a registered agent where you would normally serve this stuff. But my concern is for the person in state who's trying to sue the out-of-state person. And I want anybody who's been through that, if you've been ever done litigation, sometimes it's incredibly frustrating to obtain service on a person that the Wyoming would have jurisdiction over but you still have to obtain service. And so you have this, one of the reasons you do this is they're called long arm statutes. You've got this ability to serve through the Secretary of State. And I'm looking for some comfort that when we serve through the Secretary of State like this, that we can indeed have our service perfected. And while we can say what we want in statute, ultimately, I'm just wondering, you go back to the U.S. Supreme Court requirements, because this is an element of due process. And is there any concern, or do we have any concern that emailing a service under these circumstances provides the due process that would allow that person or that corporation then to be hailed into a Wyoming court, and if they ignore it, that we can go ahead and enter a default and get a judgment against them. I don't want to go through the trouble of going through all that effort to obtain that judgment and then having it set aside because somehow our statute didn't provide sufficient due process. That's my only concern. I doubt that we can answer that today, and we probably need to look at that maybe overnight, or maybe ask somebody in LSO to help us with that. But that's my main concern. So anyway, I'm just trying to make sure when we save somebody, we serve somebody, they stay served. So anyway, thank you.
Senator Chairwoman Nethercutt, bring us home.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're kind of belaboring this point, but it is an important one that the good senator from Attorney County is pointing out. I think it would be a fair balance to simply amend it to say that service is perfected under the subsection on the 5 days after the date the electronic communication is sent, and that would make it consistent with the mail, although recognizing that you receive that immediately as opposed to waiting for it to be delivered by the mail. But I do think if you want it to be a balance between the mail and email, that there should be perfection happens at least a few days after it's emailed to you. That, to me, that would be equitable. But remember, if someone wants to have what this bill also does is say, listen, if you want to be a Wyoming corporation and you get to avail yourselves of Wyoming protections by having a Wyoming corporate shield, which is quite profound, then you will consent to be regulated in a way that we see fit and that serves the best interests of the people of Wyoming. And this is one of those ways.
Okay. Further questions? Further questions? House Bill 27. I'm calling for the question. Question has been called for. All those in favor of Majority Floor Leader Driscoll's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation that House Bill 27 do pass. If voting all those in favor, please say aye by holding your hand to the screen. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. 6?
I got 6, Mr. Chairman.
I have 6. Okay. House Bill 27 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole beg leave to rise and sit again.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye by holding your hand to the screen. All those opposed?
One.
Mr. Short, should I continue? Mr.
One, I need to figure out who I talked to.
You want to,
Mr. President?
Mr. Chairman, you want to turn that back over to me? Thank you. This time we'll have Madam Chief Clerk read in some standing committee reports.
Reports from Standing Committee. Mr. President, February 2nd, 2021, your committee number 3 revenue, to whom was referred House Bill 30 engrossed, public utility assessment, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass amended. Voting aye, Senators Baldwin, Case, Pappas, Schuler. Voting no, Senator James. Signed, Cale Case, Chairman. Mr. President, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 53 engrossed, invasive plant species, respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Voting aye, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost, and Wasserberger. Signed, Brian Boner, Chairman. Mr. President, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 45 engrossed, changes to water right notice requirements for hearing. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Voting aye, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost, and Wasserberger. Signed, Brian Boner, Chairman. Mr. President, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 44 engrossed, Omnibus Water Bill Construction, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendment. Voting aye, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost, and Wasserberger. Signed, Brian Boner, Chairman.
Thank you, Chief Clerk. We got a little more work on the floor now. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, what would you like to do?
Mr. President.
Oh, Senator Boner.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 44, Omnibus Water Bill Construction has an appropriation. I ask that be referred to committee number 2 at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, I move Senate resolve.
President?
Wait, Senator Perkins.
Sorry.
Mr. President, this is where you do that without objection. It is so ordered.
Oh, without objection, so ordered. Thank you. Glad there's no objections. Let's go ahead, Mr. Floor Leader. Oh, Senator Nethercott first, please.
Is it time for announcements, Mr. President?
No, we're going back to work. I should feel something pressing to announce. All right, Mr. Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
Heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Let's proceed. Mr. Floor Leader.
Need to hand off to committee of the whole, Chairman.
Mr. President.
Guru, proceed. You're back in
Chairman.
charge. Senator Kinski wants to say something first before we give you the authority.
No, Mr. Chairman. I'm
Go ahead.
calling on Senator Guru, the chairman.
Okay.
Senator Kinski.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm moving along here. I've got 3 bills left in my hand, 32 ethics and disclosure, 30 public utility assessment, 53 invasive plant species. Is that what else is on the general file now, or do we have some others that have been added?
Senator Kinski, that is a great question. I got a little film noir thing going on with the committee of the whole list. I think it should say Spade and Archer across the top, but I can't quite read the rest. So Majority Floor Leader, give us a hand.
So the list right now, Mr. Chairman, thank you. House Bill 30. I've got to find the titles and I don't have them in front of me.
I can read those for you, Mr. Leader. It's public utility assessment.
House Bill 5.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I don't believe I have 5.
We don't have 5.
No.
So that won't be there. I thought that was on the list that I just got. So can you read me the list and I'll put it back up again? I've obviously got it wrong. I'm sorry.
I have a list consisting of 30, 53, and 45.
Perfect. So it's committee 5, probably I got that down. House Bill 53 will be second.
Invasive plant species.
And that is invasive plant species.
And House Bill 45.
Changes to water right notice requirements for hearing.
Mr. Floor Leader, would you recap that list one more time when you're back at your desk? Mr. Floor Leader?
Yes, sir. I'm back.
Would you recap that list one more time for those listening and watching in addition to the Senate?
House Bill 30, House Bill 53, and House Bill 45.
Thank you. Proceed, Senator Brew.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee of the Whole, please come back to order. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 30. If the Chief Clerk would please read the House bill.
House Bill 30, Public Utility Assessment, an act relating to utilities sponsored by the Revenue Committee. It was referred to the Revenue Committee, who reported back to the Senate a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendment. Voting aye, Senators Baldwin, Case, Pappas, and Schuler. Senator James, no. Signed, Cale Case, Chairman.
You heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Case?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a do pass recommendation on House Bill 30. There is a standing committee amendment. We might as well have it read in at this time.
Can we have the standing committee amendment read in, please?
House Bill 30, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to engrossed copy, page 2, line 2. I'm sorry, page 4, line 2.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the standing committee amendment. And Mr. Chairman, before I even start, I want to say that I want to thank the majority floor leader, because I think if you're following the whiteboard, he's doing a pretty good job. And it's kind of like the old days when you had a whiteboard, and it works for me. And I really do appreciate it. And I don't know if folks can see it on the YouTube, but because it's pretty small, but it does help and tells everybody where we're going. And really kudos, that was a good idea. So Mr. Chairman, House Bill 30 deals with the way that we fund the Wyoming Public Service Commission. And as you recall, we've had some discussion with a bill that involved the Public Service Commission just the other day. The Public Service Commission is charged with regulating public utilities in Wyoming. It is not a general funded agency. They receive an assessment of the revenues of the utilities that they regulate. And it's a broadly imposed assessment. It applies to electric utilities and water utilities and telecommunications companies and pipelines, actually. So it's quite an extensive, broad-based assessment that funds the agency. The problem is that it is inadequate for funding that agency on a going forward basis. And it just recently looks like the agency, we thought they might get by this year, but it actually looks like they're going to be in the red, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, right now, the assessment is uniformly applied. It's 3 mills across all the entities that it regulates. But, as we've been working in the legislature and times have changed, the amount of workload that some entities put on the Public Utility Commission is different than other entities. For example, as you all recall, that when we first came to legislature, I first came and Senator Scott was already here, but we spent a lot of time on telecommunications regulation back in the 90s, and that was just a huge deal. And there was one very large company that had a lot of the telecommunication lines in the state, over almost 300,000 of those lines. And they paid this assessment on all those lines. Well, that company doesn't have very many lines anymore. The telecommunications industry and most of the traffic has moved under the jurisdiction of the Federal Communications Commission and is not part of Wyoming. And we're not able to collect funds from that. And in fact, those funds are going to go down even more because more and more of the telecommunications traffic is data, and as opposed to voice. We can collect dollars on the mill levy on voice traffic to fund the agency, but we can't collect it on the data traffic. But here's another point. By and large, we don't do much with those entities anymore. The real heft of regulation is moved to the energy utilities, especially in the electric utility industry. And you can think of all the things that are happening out there with respect to energy utilities, which have increased the public utilities workload. And that is, it's a lot of the focus of the commission. And it will be a lot of focus as we move to more and more things begin to happen perhaps with changes in the electric utility markets. You might even note that the former chairman of the Wyoming Public Service Commission went to participate in one of those electric utility markets, which are going to have very big implications for Wyoming and increase the workload of the PSC. Another big workload increaser is some of the bills that we've passed. One of them might be that bill on net metering that we passed through the Senate the other day. That's going to increase the Public Service Commission's workload. Another one was ones we passed last time about coal-fired power plants. So the workload of the PSC is going up. And I might add that the Office of the Consumer Advocate's workload is going up as well. And they share in this assessment to fund the consumer advocate as well. But it's not enough money. So the question is, how do we get more money? And we became aware of this in the interim committee meeting. We've actually been in discussions with the PSC for a couple of years on this now, but it became aware in the interim committee that we needed to raise the assessment, and the interim committee proposed to raise the assessment by 2 mills. But we also went on a different path where we put in a 2-level assessment mechanism so that there's a level for energy utilities and the ones that are creating a lot of the workload, and a level for a lot of the other things. And you will see that if you turn to your bill and go to the engrossed copy, you can see that there's a 2-tiered system established. And the first tier is on page 3, and it talks about the assessment of 0.3 of a mil, and then an additional mil to go on top of that, Mr. Chairman. So give me 1 second to find my place here. So the higher level of assessment will apply to investor-owned utilities. That's not your public entities, but your investor-owned utilities, the interstate pipelines, and the rate-regulated rural electric co-ops. But we actually don't have any rate-regulated rural electric co-ops, Mr. Chairman, so at least not yet. It's possible we will have if they grow above a certain level of production. The lower level of assessment, Mr. Chairman, would be it's the old level that would not be increased, would be for the non-rate regulated electric co-ops, which is everybody in Wyoming, by the way, water utilities, telecommunications companies, where that assessment cap is unchanged at 30 cents per $100. So who pays this assessment? It's rolled into utility rates. And the last time it's been set at the 3 mills or 30 cents per $100 since 1973, Mr. Chairman. But times have just changed and the workload is different and the people paying into the assessment is smaller. And it's partly smaller because of COVID. It's partly smaller because of low oil and gas prices. Let me tell you how that works out. A lot of the electricity in Wyoming is used to power oil wells. And oil wells, if you are in the kind of the lower end of the oil wells, the so-called stripper wells, basically you have to use electricity to run your pump. It pumps and pumps and pumps, and it mostly gets out water. That's very typical in Wyoming for these older wells. And you get a little bit of oil. And so they're very, very sensitive to the price of electricity. And when the price of electricity gets too high, it's not worth it. So the wells are shut off. And so that causes a huge decrease in demand for electricity. Amazing when you think about it. But as a consequence, the revenues from electricity are down. They're down a lot. And that's affecting the PSC's assessment. And that's kind of driven by COVID, kind of driven by the fact that nobody's flying around the world much anymore. People are staying home and not commuting into cities. It is, and how long this will be in effect, I don't know what to tell you. I think I already mentioned some changes in the telecommunications industry, and as more and more of voice traffic, it turns into data traffic, and we're not able to get that to be assessed in Wyoming. That causes problems. And finally, I might point out that in the future, we are facing the sunset of the Telecommunications Act. That means that if we don't do something about that, or if we choose not to, it'd be a, I'm not advocating one way or the other here, but that means that after 2023, there won't be an assessment on telecommunications companies. So again, further eroding the revenues of the PSC. The gist is this: we had an amendment in the interim to bump it up by 2 mils for the one set of companies, the investor-owned utilities and the interstate pipelines and the rate-regulated electric co-ops. And our good friends down the hall decided to cut that in half. We restored the full amount because really I think it needed to be restored. And the reason is, Mr. Chairman, I don't think they were thinking about the implications of the telecommunications companies or some of the issues with respect to oil and gas demand. So now I do note, Mr. Chairman, this is sort of a maximum, and the public, even our Wyoming, our good appropriations committee will be able to review the budget of the PSC. There's no intent to expand the PSC. They just want to do a good job and do the job that we've asked them to do. And so they're going to need money to do it, and they're going to be in the red. They're already running in the red in fiscal year 20. It'll drop further by fiscal year 21, but it could be down maybe as much as 11 or 12% by fiscal year 22. And it is a cap. So if we don't need the full amount, we won't have to do it, Mr. Chairman, and our Appropriations Committee and others will be on top of that. I assure you the industry watches this like a hawk. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions. What the Standing Committee does is it just reimposes the additional 2 mils for those tier ones instead of the 1 mil that as it was reduced by our friends down the hall. I will note that the friends down the hall did a little bit of good work in that they further refined the definition of the cooperatives. And my understanding, the co-op utilities, their representative testified they support the language that came out from the House. Certainly is good language. So the Standing Committee amendment only deals with putting the assessment back up to the 2 mils. Happy to answer any questions.
Sorry. Questions on the amendment then would be in order, Mr. Chairman, Case?
However you choose, Mr. Chairman, they both moved.
Okay. Question. Let's start with the amendment. Questions on the amendment, or either way, questions either way, whatever your pleasure. Questions?
Call for the question on the amendment.
Okay. Question's been called on the amendment. All those in favor of Chairman Case's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 30, please signal saying aye by raising your hand to the screen. All
22.
All those opposed, please raise your hand to the screen. 1, 2.
It looks like 2 opposed.
Oh, I got 3. Wait a minute. Oh, keep your hands up on opposed, please. 1 second. I got James Hutchings.
Oh, I see 3. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that Standing Committee amendment has passed. Mr. Chairman, Case, please.
Mr. Chairman, so I think you'll probably recall that our normal rules for Committee of the Whole most likely, we just have a voice vote unless there was a division. So you don't quite need to get on committee of the whole. We don't quite need to have, you know, the nth degree of precision.
Apologies. Apologies. I'll work on that. Further questions, further comments?
Question on the bill.
Senator Landon has his hand up.
I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong screen. Chairman Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm sorry to hold things up. I really appreciate our economics professor for walking us through this bill, and I think it is important. I'm just maybe just a quick 30,000 foot reminder on the data piece and what the hurdle is for any ability to capture or be able to assess on data. Because it's all getting, you know, the telecommunications industry is all getting so jumbled together. It all seems like data now. So just real quickly, I was hoping that the good chairman could help me out, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Landon. That's a good question. So I use one of the bigger companies on my telephone, and I do a lot of texting. I don't know about you guys, but I text and I send pictures back and forth and do that. I probably actually don't talk on the phone as much as I used to. And it, you know, I can remember in the old days in the Senate, there'd be a break and we'd all be bolting for the bank of telephones to call our constituents. And that was the only way you were able to reach them, really, unless you were going to write them a letter, which everybody's down on letters these days. I don't know if you heard the last, but as telecommunications, wireless was first predominantly a voice service, and it was great to be able to talk on this telephone. Wireless is becoming predominantly a data service, and there's more wireless traffic than landline traffic in spades, and that's been going on for almost maybe 15 years now. So what's happened in the telecommunication industry is it has shifted from landlines to wireless to data, and the amount that's left in the voice world, whether it's landlines or wireless, is small. We collect our assessment based on the proportion of voice traffic. And that's the way our Universal Service Fund works. That's the way our public utility assessment works. States have tried to assert jurisdiction over data in past years. It's been quite a long time, but the FCC preempted us. And that's been well supported. So we don't have the ability to assess on the basis of data. We're stuck just with voice, and it's a declining percentage of the total. And indeed, if telecom goes out of our purview with the sunset coming up, it's going to be complete. But for right now, we are grabbing onto a smaller pie. And one very large company has indicated that they are going to recalibrate their voice versus data, and that will be a reduction to the Wyoming public utility tax.
Further questions? Senator Cooper.
I don't hear him. I think you're muted, Senator Cooper.
I think you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll try it a different way here. I have a question on regarding oil and gas stripper wells and some comments here. One of the large producers in my district, their utility bill is about $6 million a month, and they're in the process of going to self-generation in some of the fields By self-generation, I mean they're using their local gas for a natural gas-fired generation system, so they can get off the grid from the major utility companies. One of the things that they're seeing is that they have to operate these generation systems themselves. They can't use a third party to do that generation because of regulations. And I guess my question is, they're really wanting to get these marginal wells back on, but the price of electricity right now is just, as a good committee chair said, is just restricted for them. So it's kind of a catch-22 for Wyoming. We can't get the wells back on because the price of electricity is too high, but we can't turn these guys loose for self-generation either, or third-party generation. So my question is, will we be able to recapture any kind of mills from this self-generation, or will PSC have any control over it all? Or if we were able to somehow allow these people to use a third party to generate within their field, not to go out on the grid with it, just for use within the field, if we could capture some revenues from that, because I think it would be a win-win for us if we can do that. We can get a little more money for the PSC, but we can get more severance and excise tax backs into the system also. Thank you, sir.
Other questions? Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, that's a great kind of question and a bit of discussion about what the future of the electric utility industry is going to look like in Wyoming and others. And right now we have a low level of competition. We're just a very unusual state in that about 70+% of the electricity that's consumed within Wyoming goes to very large industrial customers, many of which are the oil and gas operators that's been described. You have refineries, you have mines, but 70%, that's very different. When I was on the staff of the Illinois Commerce Commission, that amount of industrial load was about 20%. So here it's something that's big, and we've got to pay attention to it because they cover a lot of the costs in Wyoming. But the answer to your question is that's really not part of this bill. The bill applies the assessment to anybody that comes under is regulated by the PUC. And right now what's legal is that your operator, that oil and gas operation, could own a generator themselves and produce their own electricity, but we haven't got there to cross over into third-party production. I think I'm farther there than some of my colleagues, but it's a big impact, in part because 70% of the electricity is sold to those very big customers, and it's a big consequence. I know we possibly are moving in that direction, but it's kind of a discussion for another day. There are other factors out there that are causing more competition, including, we may face coming under the requirements of the California system operator. That's a possibility. We may join up with the Southwest Power Pool, and all these things are going to decide some of the impacts about how electricity is sold in Wyoming. It's all going to increase the workload of the PSC, I promise you. And I'd be happy to talk to the good senator offline. There is a group of industrial consumers in Wyoming. They're well represented by one of the prominent firms in Cheyenne, and they are working towards the exact kind of thing that he would like to suggest. I know that we will see these proposals in the future.
Thank you, Chairman Case. Further, Chairwoman Ellis.
Muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I read the bill, I've been working on another bill that involves that uniform assessment requirement that we have in our Constitution. And so it is a bit of a flag for me to see that it's stricken in a few parts of the bill. And we are, I understand, starting to create different rates. And so I just was wondering what discussion occurred during the interim, and if this issue of lack of uniformity in assessment, how that was, if it was discussed at all, and what some of that conversation said about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Case, you want to take a whack at that one?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it's a very interesting point. The uniformity of assessment in the Constitution, as I understand, relates to the property taxes and the creation of different classes, and that establishes the tiers. This is not a property tax. It's called a mill, but that's only because it's fractional with respect to the same fraction of 1,000. And so it's not a mill levy in the sense of the property tax. So I don't think it comes under the dictates of the Constitution. And so I guess that's my answer. I'll stick to it for a while till I'm corrected.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, in addition to that, is not this assessment at least roughly proportional to the amount of workload that the particular part of the PSC business is generating?
That's true.
Okay, further questions? Further questions, comments? Sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Chairman Case's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation on House Bill 30. Please raise your hand to the screen to vote aye. Those opposed, raise your hand to the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 6, Helen?
7.
7. Okay, so House Bill 30 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 53. Will the Chief Clerk please read the House Bill?
House Bill 53, Invasive Plant Species, an act relating to agriculture, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee. It was referred to Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, who returned a due pass recommendation back to the Senate. Voting aye were Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost, and Wasserberger. Signed, Brian Boner, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure, Chairman Boner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on House Bill 53. I'd ask that you call on the mostly adequate senator from Converse County or Platte County, wherever I'm from today. I'll explain.
Please.
Okay. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a bill that's a result of the Governor's Invasive Species Initiative. This was a part an initiative that's taken in folks from the state, the local level, our federal partners, as well as the state legislature. So partnership across many different entities, all focused on the question of what we could be doing better to combat these invasive species, which we've had some good discussion already in a previous bill as to the importance of these good resource management practices, as well as some of the new and evolving threats we face in this area. So what we have is, I guess, the legislative recommendations that resulted from that 2-year effort. And I guess you could break them down into 2 different categories. One, we're providing some more direction to the Weed and Pest Council as to what the state's role is going to be in ensuring the most efficient allocation of our resources. And it can be described basically as coordinating efforts as being a warehouse for information, leveraging the institutions we have at the state level, whether they be the University of Wyoming or our community colleges, as well as coordinating efforts between the local and federal level. Also, another second and perhaps more substantive change is dealing with the second mill levy. associated with weed and pest districts. For a little bit of background, there's a 1 mill levy assessment that's standard for all your local districts statewide. Then you have the option of a second mill levy that's at the discretion of the county commissioners. That's supposed to be for special programs or special weeds. So what we're doing is we're giving a little bit more flexibility to the local level to use that second mill levy, still with some sideboards, but fewer sideboards. So in effect, we're seeing what we could do to be more efficient statewide while still giving some flexibility at the local level where it's needed most. So getting into the bill, Mr. Chairman, you can see the section 1 basically deals with that new direction we're giving to the Weed and Pest Council. This is a statewide council that helps with the statewide policy dealing with weed and pests. So you just go through the laundry list here. They are looking to kind of creating, managing, and enhancing a comprehensive invasive species control plans by each of the following subparagraphs on page 2. There's a lot of discussion over the past 2 in terms of data systems to support the district, so they have a little bit bigger picture what's happening not just in their district but statewide. Make sure that we enhance that coordination effort, communicating among districts. Secondly, we're coordinating with the University of Wyoming and the community colleges to assess some of the impacts. We're using some of that academic knowledge and making sure that it's being well communicated to the people doing the work in our local districts. Once again, coordinating with our academic experts to expand outreach, provide applied research, make sure we're using the best practices for our local districts. Going on to page 3, we're also going to make sure we're working with our federal partners and because obviously we want a more holistic approach to invasive species management. It's especially tough when you have a mix of federal, private, state lands in the same area. Obviously the weeds and pests don't really care about those jurisdictional boundaries. And so we see an opportunity for the Weed and Pest Council to ensure everybody's working together, whether it be a local weed and pest district or our federal partners. We have a report back requirement. At least once every 2 years, they're going to report back to the Joint Ag Committee as to how everything's working and what may be adjusted. And once again, on subparagraph 6, getting towards the bottom of page 3, making sure that everybody's cooperating on that landscape scale projects to make sure that political jurisdictions don't interfere and that everybody's on the same page to the greatest extent possible. Do the same thing to make sure there's public awareness. Obviously, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's important when it comes to invasive species. Make sure the general public is aware of the ways that they can help to prevent the introduction of new invasives in states and areas of the state. And of course, we have rulemaking with the Weed and Pest Council on paragraph B at the top of page 4. So going on into section 2, we're still dealing with that same concept of enhancing coordination among local districts and throughout different jurisdictions. So we get into amending the requirements and duties of the district boards at the local level and make sure that they're sharing any data that may be helpful to a comprehensive plan and make sure they're up-channeling information that may be relevant to the state. So going on into page 5, we get a little bit more into adding more flexibility for that second mill levy. And this is for that special management program. Once again, I think about 9 to 10 of our counties have it, and others do not. It's optional, but for those counties that do have that, it's because they need it and they would really appreciate the added flexibility that this bill gives them. So a lot of cleanup language, and I think that was also highlight page line 13 and 14, not just circulating notice as far as changing this second mill levy in the newspaper, but also giving an opportunity to communicate over another media if that is necessary by the board. So that's an addition to, doesn't eliminate the requirement of the newspaper notice. So mostly updates here. The biggest change is going to be regarding that is going to be section 3. The repealer there is the one that limits the special program to only 2 species. So we want to get rid of that 2 species requirement, and so it can be as many species that are being treated as the board may deem fit. Going back up to subparagraph G, we're making that the making sure that the Weed and Pest Council is the one making the approval, not the board of the Department of Agriculture. Once again, making the Weed and Pest Council sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, for weed and pest policy in the state. So we have emergency rulemaking here, and then a July 1 effective date. So that's the bill, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I'd defer to any committee members who might want to pick up a point or two that I may have missed, but I look forward to any questions that the Senate may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions, comments? Oh, Senator Scott, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I must say these bills make me a little nervous, especially as to what it might be doing with the mill levy and expanding what goes on. My question is, what kind of restraints are there on the Weed and Pest Council when their invasive species is also being used as a crop, or when it's being used as one particular one is commonly used in shelter belts, and they've declared it an invasive species? What are the restraints in their activities on those things?
Other questions? Senator Landon, Chairman Landon, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the work of the good committee. I want to go to the duties, powers, and supervisory compensation 115105. And I was just sitting here thinking that it used to be the Board of Agriculture that oversees our weed and pest districts out there. We create this new entity, and it just feels like it's a little more prescriptive, or I hope I'm kind of maybe misreading this bill a little bit on that front, but I'm sensitive to the fact that we're going to back a lot of budgets up over the next several weeks. And this requires the sharing of data and other actions to support the coordinated efforts from this statewide entity. Just a little bit of heartburn on that. Maybe the chairman can help me. Thank you.
Okay, Chairman Boner, you want to take those?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I probably did a pretty poor job explaining up front, the Weed and Pest Council already exists. We're not creating a new entity at the state level or anything like that. So all that we're doing is providing some direction in statute to that Weed and Pest Council, which has been thoroughly vetted, by the way, with the Weed and Pest Council, as well as the local weed and pest districts. So not a huge seismic shift when it comes to the new direction we have with the Weed and Pest Council duties. They were asking for this this guidance, and once again, it's just simply stipulating that they're going to act as sort of a clearinghouse and a coordinator among different agencies. The idea being that we have to have a more coordinated response to these invasives. This first question, this bill does not change any restraints or any due process to private property rights. If you were growing a crop that is apparently considered an invasive species, I can't say I'm familiar with such a situation, but we're not changing anything as far as the weed and pest ability to come and spray on somebody's property without their permission or anything like that. All that the provisions in removing that repealer that we do is right now that additional mill levy is limited to 2 species that can be treated, and we're simply removing that restriction so they can do treat as many species as they want with that second mill levy, not changing anything else in the way that those weed and pest districts operate. So I hope that helps further explain what the bill does and most importantly doesn't do.
Further questions? Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Noting my potential conflict, 11.5.503, cancel out the newspaper. You're still giving notice to the public. You just throwing the word out, taping a sign on the door. What are you going to do there? Shall be given to the public.
Okay, well, you hold that question. Let me go to Senator James. I think you had your hand up. Did you have a question? Senator James.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, does this bill in any way obligate the counties to pop out their mills at 2? And then how many counties are currently at 2 mills?
Okay, and then one more. You want to take one more? Senator Vice President Hicks has his hand up. You want to make it a trifecta?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I want to go back to where the president on the section, and this is a big policy shift on that section. If I can get my, let's see, 11.5.303 program components, funding, rulemaking authority, and penalties. And so with the currently as it stands is the weed and pest boards, 10 days before they make a final decision, they have to notify any of those landowners that would be in that designated area. And this is the policy shift. Rather than having to notify those landowners prior to making the final decision, now it says once the board makes a final decision, it says they may, instead of notice shall be given to the public in at least one newspaper of general circulation with the county and other medium. And here's the big policy question: if determined necessary by the board. And so before it was mandatory, the board would have to do a notification before final decision was made. And now the board can make a final decision, and then they can choose to not notify the public if they so. That's a huge policy shift in that section. And just a little background is to why the weed and pest boards or the task force, in this case it wouldn't be the weed and task force, but the task force felt compelled to bypass that public notice process and implement a major policy shift.
Okay, Mr. Chairman Boner, newspaper, mills, and notification. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So focusing on, I guess, the substance of the 2 of the comments first. It's my understanding, we're talking, it looks like specifically on lines 13 and 14 of page 5, the way I could see how the Vice President could read it, that it makes the entire notification, whether it be through the newspaper or other means, discretionary by the board. I read it as you still have a requirement of making that notice in the newspaper, and you can communicate it but through another medium if that's determined necessary by the board. Now that was an amendment in the other chamber. It was not necessarily a part of or how the bill left the joint committee. So I can go ahead and circle back with members in the other chamber and make sure that we're clear on the intent. I don't think it's meant to get rid of the requirement for the newspaper of general the notice in the newspaper. And going down and further into lines 15 and 16, I'm not reading that as a requirement to notify all the participating landowners. Rather, it's a list of the participating landowners in the notice in the newspaper of general circulation. So I think that's an important distinction. Regarding whether there's a district that has a full 2 mill levies. First of all, there's nothing requiring anybody going to the full 2 mill levies. Nothing requiring that at all. Like I said several times before, we're just adding some more flexibility with that second mill levy. And I'm not aware of how many districts are at the full 2 mills. I know that about 9 or 10 of them are at least more than the 1 mill. They are taking advantage of this special mill levy. To what extent, I don't know, whether it's a full second mill or some portion thereof, but I could ask the Weed and Pest Council that question and get back to the body on a second reading with that specific information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope that gets those questions at least out there. Any others? Other questions, comments? Let's see, am I missing anybody? Okay. Coming back. Okay. Is you ready for the question? All those in favor of Chairman Boner's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation on House Bill 45. And if all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye by raising your hand to the screen.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I believe we're on 53.
Whoops. Oh, we're on, I'm sorry, we are on 53. I apologize, I jumped ahead. Sorry, on 50, let me start again. All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion and the committee of the whole rises to report and do so with a favorable recommendation that House Bill 53 pass. And all those in favor say aye by holding your hand to the screen. Now I've confused everybody.
I got 17.
Okay. Those opposed?
$11.
Okay. House Bill 53 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 45. Would the chief clerk please read the House bill?
House Bill 45 changes to water right notice requirements for hearing, an act relating to water. Sponsored by the Select Water Committee, it was referred to your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, that returned a due pass recommendation to the Senate. Voting aye, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Koss, and Wasserberger. Signed, Brian Boner, Chairman.
We've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Chairman Boner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on House Bill 45. I believe there's a, just stand by. Oh, never mind. With that, I will call on the senior senator from Park County to explain the bill.
I'm sorry, Senator Koss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will, hope you can hear well because my bandwidth says it's low right now. I might be a little low too. I thought maybe our chairman was going to finish this bill up for me real quickly, but he let me down on that one. Anyway, to wrap this one up, House Bill number 45, changes to water rights, notice of requirements for hearing. My good senators, this is a good bill, and the background for it is a lot of our agriculture land is being taken up by residents, and therefore the land is not irrigatable any longer because of the number of buildings built on the land. With this being the situation, there's either one of two things that could happen. Either we could lose our water rights, which obviously we don't want to for those kinds of things, or we can allocate those water rights. A lot of these water rights are senior water rights from a long time ago, and of course those are extremely important to retain because there's no restrictions on them. So what this is about is notifying the requirements for a hearing when your water right is no longer being used. And if you go down to the bottom of page 1, the state engineer or the superintendent shall set a hearing on the petition and require the petitioner to provide 30 days notice by certified mail and return receipt requested of the time and place of the hearing. Now I want to expound on that. We've done away with registered mail and we've gone to certified mail. First of all, certified mail is cheaper. Second of all, registered mail they can refuse, and then they essentially haven't gotten it. As we move on down to page 2, this is the finishing of that statement. It says hearing to any owners of appropriations which divert between the old and new points of diversion, and any owners or users of ditches or facilities to be affected by the proposed changes. And then down below here, we have a fairly long explanation. It says if the state engineer or the state board of control determines that at least 20 owners of the appropriations or owners or users of ditches or facilities require notice of the hearing, the state engineer or state board of control, in lieu of requiring notice by certified mail with return receipt requested, may allow the petitioner to provide notice of hearing by regular mail and publication. Notice by publication under this subsection shall be accomplished by publishing notice for 2 consecutive weeks in a newspaper of general circulation in the county where the new point of diversion is located. The last date of publication shall occur not less than 10 days and not more than 30 days prior to the hearing. It goes on down to talk about the petitioner shall provide the superintendent with a record of proceedings which shall be transmitted to the state board of control. And that is really the sum of this. We're just basically saying we need to notify, but we're trying to cut down on the cost of some of those by going to certified mail instead of registered mail, and also by going to notification in the newspaper and regular mail for the notice of publications in the subsection. With that, I would open it to any questions, knowing that we've had a couple of questions previously on certified and registered mail. So I will do the best to answer those. And if I fail, I'm sure I'll have some backup from a couple of others. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cost. Questions on House Bill 45? Questions on House Bill 45?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. I'm sorry, Senator Ellis, Chairwoman Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little more discussion about why this bill, the bringers of it, landed on at least 20 owners and not something higher or something lower. Just kind of curious to know what the discussion was on picking that number.
Okay. Any other questions? Other questions? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, related to that, what harm would be done if we removed the 20 figure there and just had that as an option that that could be allowed at any time? Because I suspect the 20 has to do with the cost of doing things. Why not just remove that and then we can adapt if the cost of mail goes up further.
Senator Cost, do you want to take a shot at that?
If I can get my mute button off, I sure will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the engrossed copy, and I would need to check back on the other side of the building to see if this was put in by them. To be able to talk about the 20 owners, I would agree that this was probably a number that was just pulled up, determined by the cost of sending out this notification. And as far as removing it, I don't see a problem with if somebody wanted to remove that and just say notification, but I would say if any of the others involved would say that's not a good idea to say that, I'm open to that as well.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, and then Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Vice President, I was going to have him back me up. We did this in committee, and part of the problem is some of these subdivisions, you might have 200-300 that go out, and they're hard to get to, they're hard to do, and that was kind of what we agreed on. I'm going to go ahead where he raised his hand and defer if that's the way he remembered it as well. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe it was a magic number, but it was a recommendation that came from the Board of Control that oversees these petitions. And so I don't think there is anything magic about that. It was a recommendation from the agency. And I do think it was the reason that there was some numeric thing. It could be hundreds, depending on the nature of the change of the point of diversion. And so it was just trying to limit the cost. I would just point out that the cost is being shifted in here from the state to the petitioner. So if you want to move your point of diversion, that cost is now going to shift onto the petitioner. And I think that was part of the rationale of trying to limit those costs, because now we've shifted that onto the petitioner to change that point of diversion, not the state of Wyoming.
Okay. That was Chairman Case. Question. Oop, you're still muted.
And I already gave my best speech, Mr. Chairman.
Oh.
I'm so sorry, but this is a good thing for petitioners. It could save a lot of money, the cost of these registered mailings. And I'm a case in point. I have a ditch company with, a couple hundred different people. And if each one, this could really help us out, I think. And I don't think I have a conflict on this. I think water right holders are a pretty big class around the world. It does affect me potentially personally and through the ditch company that I'm an officer in. But this could be a really good thing for people. I think it could save the petitioners a lot of money, as I read it.
Chairwoman Ellis, did you have something else? You're good? Good. Okay. Any other questions? Other questions?
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I need to correct myself. Currently, it is not a cost shift. Currently, the state engineer's office or the Board of Control encords that cost, and then they bill the petitioner. I'm just trying to recollect. So it just changes that they would do the direct mailings instead of having to go through the Board of Control for the certified or do the advertisement. And so it's still, the cost is borne by the petitioner irregardless. That's a different methodology and potentially reduce costs.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for clearing that up. Are there questions, comments, questions? Sensing question being called. All those in favor of Chairman Boner's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation that House Bill 45 do pass. All in favor, say aye by raising your hand to the screen. All those opposed?
No opposed?
Opposed. House Bill 45 has passed committee of the whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it.
Reading clerk will read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. President, your committee of the whole, having had under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 9, House Bill 9 engrossed, do pass. House Bill 18 engrossed, do pass. House Joint Resolution 1 engrossed, do pass amended. House Bill 25, do pass. House Bill 66, do pass. House Bill 15, do pass. House Bill 13, do pass amended. House Bill 27, do pass. House Bill 30, do pass amended. House Bill 53, do pass. House Bill 45, do pass. Signed, Senator Garreau, Chairman.
Mr. President.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President, I move for adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion carried. The report has been adopted. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk. Mr. Majority Floor
Mr.
Leader.
President, I move that we stand recessed until 10 a.m. tomorrow, February 3rd.
Q, you've announcements?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, please. Go ahead.
I think he wants to, he made a motion to recess until
Oh,
then.
that's
Isn't the appropriate motion to
right.
adjourn?
Well, we're just going to take you right back to work later tonight.
Oh,
Mr.
well,
Floor
That's what
Leader.
I want to know. If we're done for the day, are we coming back?
Mr. Floor Leader, can you give us a night's rest?
How about an old script? Mr. President, I move that we adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Announcements. Chairman Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 2, appropriations, we try harder, will meet about 10 minutes after adjournment, take up the re-referral of House Bill 44, Omnibus Water Bill Construction. Thank you.
Chairman Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your number 1 committee will meet tomorrow morning, February 3rd at 9 a.m. to review House Bill 35, statutory theft amendments. Good senators and committee, there was an error on the initial notice that happened today that indicated we would look at a Senate file tomorrow. We are not going to look at a Senate file. The notice has been corrected. We're only going to do one bill, House Bill 35 at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Madam Chair, let's go to Chairman Wasberger and then to Chairman Landon in that order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee, committee number 9, Minerals, will voluntarily meet on Friday, February 5th at 8 a.m. to hear a presentation from Pete Obermuller about the impact of the federal ban of drilling on federal lands. And that is open to any senator who would like to attend. It will be Friday, February 5th at 8 a.m.
Thank you. Chairman Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Crazy 8 Committee, Transportation and Military Affairs, is going to meet tomorrow upon adjournment, and we will take up a couple of Senate files. We want to get out ahead of the rest of these chairmen and have them loaded up and ready when we get back together next month. Senate File 13, Abandoned Vehicles, Towing Service Liens and Titles, and Senate File 9, State Employee Moving Expenses. So those 2 bills, we'll take them up right on adjournment. Shouldn't take too long, Mr. President, and they'll be waiting for us in March. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Baldwin, I saw your hand up, and then to Chairman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Perfect 10 Committee, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will be meeting Wednesday, February the 3rd. We're going to hear 2 bills tomorrow, hopefully. We're going to start with Senate File 52, Mental Health and Substance Use Parity.
Freezing up,
Bill
you're
4.
freezing up, Chairman Baldwin. Do you repeat those numbers again, please? No, we really lost you. Let's go to Chairman Scott. We'll come back to Chairman Baldwin.
Mr. Chairman, Committee number 4,
Yep.
Education, will not meet tomorrow morning, as we have, to the best of my knowledge, no House bills in possession, and we have heard the Senate bills that we have in possession.
Thank you. Back to Chairman Baldwin. Sorry about that. We got you back. Chairman Baldwin. We got a vice chair on that committee that could step in and give us the schedule.
If you could, can you hear me now, Mr. President?
Now we've got you, sir.
I'm going to talk really fast because my internet's dying. Perfect 10 Committee, going to meet on Wednesday the 3rd. We're going to hear Senate File 52, Insurance, Mental Health, and Substance Use Parodies, and if time allows, House Bill 4, Mental Health Professions Practice Act Amendments. And that was perfectly done, I might add. We'll see everyone in the morning.
Thank you. Further announcements? Further announcements? All right, I'd just like to note, I'm grateful for the return of the whiteboard. That I consider that whiteboard an old friend. Really got into people's lives with that last year. Now it's back. Okay. All right, let's, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The Senate shall stand adjourned until 10 a.m., 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021.